Okay, so now I'm going to provide the annotations that I've got for you for Entombed Warriors, bearing in mind that the annotations and meaning that you have done for this particular poem is definitely relevant. You may find that some of what you identified is the same or similar to what I'm about to go through here. You might find that some of your annotations are different to what I've got. Doesn't mean that you're wrong. So long as you can back up what you say, your reading of a poem is valuable. So hopefully you're starting to gain confidence in going with your ideas and your ability to find these things in this poetry. So I'm not going to reread the poem right now because I'm sure that that's probably been done already for you today. I'm just going to get straight into my annotations. Okay, so one of the things I asked you to look for was the use of verbs, and I want to point out this verb here, plotted, because it's a great verb, plotted his burial, because it is a verb that I think has a nefarious tone. Now, if you don't know what nefarious means, it's a great word, and I want you to write down the definition of it if you've not come across it before. It means something that is wicked or criminal or has got bad intentions. And this idea of plotted, normally if you plot something, it's something that has got that negative connotation or something that's to be concerned about. So here we're going to write verb equals nefarious tone. Oops, what is happening? All right, equals nefarious tone. I feel like I'm writing bigger and bigger and I'm going to run out of room. That's all right. Nefarious tone. And it also shows that he was an emperor who was very aware of his own mortality or his earthly mortality, very concerned. And to plot something usually implies that you put a great deal of thought and planning into what you're doing. And that word plotting does definitely show that for us, that it was something he was very consumed with. So I'm going to sum that up with plus aware of his earthly, and I'm saying earthly mortality because he really did believe that there would be life after death for him, or at least he wanted to believe that desperately. So it shows that for this emperor, the importance of his afterlife. I mean, imagine spending so many years planning for your death and so much labour and thought and effort. I do certainly hope that he entered the afterlife with all of his soldiers and all those plans were for something, hopefully. Now, there's another verb right down the bottom of the poem that I wanted to point out because I think we've got these two words that do link. So there is that linking that's going on. Now, how am I going to draw this between? Go like this. I'm pretty messy today, aren't I? Okay. Bit messy, but that's all right. You get the idea. And we're going to put linking verbs and say that his plotting was, like at the end of the poem, his plotting is exposed as being potentially all for nothing. I don't think Udru makes a decision either way as to whether or not she believes that his version of the afterlife, happened for him. But it ends, what to do that for? It ends quite sadly, really, exposed to the world his fear and his insecurity. So we're writing linking verbs, his plotting was exposed as, actually I'm going to say exposed as fear, because he was such a formidable emperor and he was known for being incredibly intelligent, but also quite vicious, and he was feared. And so the idea that plotting that we're saying was nefarious ended up exposing that which he was trying to hide, which was his fear. Now, all of this, of course, remember, this extra detail that I'm giving to you is what you can write into the tables that we get you guys to do for each of these poems. So where you've got the quote, technique and analysis, that analysis part is where you can add some of this information as I'm giving it in an analytical way. That's why these videos are so great, because you can go back and use them when you're creating those tables for yourself, or you could pause me now and fill it in, whatever works for you. All right, so there was one other verb, so I'm doing this a little bit differently today. So rather than kind of going through the poem chronologically, I'm picking out these techniques that I've asked you to look for. And this lovely verb, nursed, okay? Whoop. And it's quite a, what am I doing? All over the place tonight. Okay, so this verb, nursed, it's a very gentle, loving verb that is very much contrasted against the idea of plotting. And it is one that links us, or links this poem to China Woman, I think, because in China Woman, you'll remember that the earth is represented as a pregnant woman, a woman who cares for and nurtures the earth, and, or, you know, the people on her earth and nature. And here we have that re-emerging image. Now, even though we have no mention of the Aboriginal cultural symbols specifically in this poem, we know from the poems we've studied previously that symbolism of the rainbow serpent continues to remain important throughout her work. So as soon as I read now, the Earth Mother nursed her son, it reminds me of the way that she likened the rainbow serpent to the earth of, or, you know, the traditions of China, and that idea of fertility and care. So we are writing verb, caring, protecting, and we've got the links to China Woman. And I mean, this is the great thing about Ujuru's poetry, that these poems can be read in isolation as standalone poems, but when you read them together, you can really see that commonality and those themes that reappear. So we're just going to expand on this a little bit. Links to China Woman, as Earth is again represented as a nurturing woman, linking with Aboriginal culture. So she's always got that with her. Great. Now, there is, if we go back up here, I also asked you to have a look for alliteration. And we've got a really nice example of alliteration between lines 4 and 9. So, that was the other thing that you should have done, is to number your lines. So hopefully you've done that. I clearly have not on this one. So let me just do these first few as I refer to them. So all right, that'll do for now. We've got the alliterative C that we can identify between lines 4 and 9. So just have a listen to how those sound, with careful and clear detail called in his artists to prepare for his resurrection. clay warriors and horses, a legion of foot soldiers, cavalry. And that interspersed repetitive C allows for there to be a rhythm. It's like a phonetic rhythm that emphasizes the exacting nature of the preparation. So what I mean by that is that idea of plotting. If you're plotting, you're very careful, you're methodical, you know what you're doing step by step by step. And when we've got that careful, clear, called, clay, cavalry, it's almost like that that beat of the next thing and the next thing. So the way we're going to write that here is alliteration. And we will say the phonetic rhythm emphasizes the exacting nature of the preparation. Now, it can be a bit of a daunting thing, and I'm kind of going a little bit off topic here. And because I was starting to talk about something else, I have written preparting, whatever that means. So hold on. Exacting nature of the preparation is what I was supposed to write. Okay. No, what I wanted to say is that if you find yourself in that first paper in the HSC and in the trial, where you are doing text and human experiences and you've got some unseen texts, one of them might be a poem, and you've got to analyse the poem in a very short amount of time and look for those techniques and be able to write about it. And sometimes if you're feeling a bit nervous, that can feel a little bit daunting. Some of these very simple techniques, the ones that are easy to find, like alliteration, can be great ones to look for first, because when things like alliteration are used, you know that they do something to the sound of the poem, the rhythm of the poem. And it's quite easy to go, oh, I can see this alliteration and I understand that that rhythm is emphasising whatever it is that the poem is about. And so that might be a nice way to settle into analysing something you haven't seen before, to look at these things like alliteration, look for those verbs, those things that aren't too difficult to spot, okay? Just a little tip there from me to you. Now, the biblical term is, and funny thing about biblical terms is if you haven't been, brought up in religion, or, you don't know very much about the Bible stories and things like that, you might think, oh gosh, what even is she talking about? Biblical allusions and references are usually those ones, and artists use them a lot. And when I say artists, I mean composers, authors, literal painters, whatever. They will often use those ones that are pretty much universally known, or at least among Christian countries, like most of us know about the birth of Jesus and the, three wise men going along and following the star, and Mary and Joseph being turned away from the hotels and giving birth in a barn. So most of us know that Christmas story. Most of us know the Adam and Eve story, where Adam was created by God, his rib was made into Eve as a partner, they were in the Garden of Eden, told not to eat the apple, along comes a snake, goes, eat the apple, they eat the apple, we're all now sinners. So those kind of very well-known stories are often used because people can straight away identify the meaning or the symbols that are attached to those. So, when we see the apple, there's that idea of temptation and sin. Think about the, if you know the Twilight books, and the first cover that was out for the first Twilight book, I think, was hands holding an apple, I hope I'm right. And, so it was that suggestive of sin and the forbidden fruit. So here we've got a reference to the Bible story of Jesus' resurrection. So he was crucified on the cross, put into a tomb that was like a cave with a big rock over the entrance, and after 3 days he rose from the dead and then ascended into heaven. So that is our biblical term, resurrection. So we're going to write biblical term, and for the meaning, like why do it? Well, the resurrection of Christ meant that sins were forgiven. Jesus was able to go up into heaven, and in turn, according to Christian religion, people who follow Christianity will, if they confess their sins, be able to enter the kingdom of heaven in the afterlife. So we all can also have that afterlife that means that we're not truly immortal. We've only got that earthly immortality. And so we have here that desire, because this is all about the king's, or the emperor, sorry, his desire for immortality. And remember in the little video that I put up on the Google Classroom, it only went for about 4 minutes, but it said that he was well known for traveling the world or sending people around the world looking for the elixir of life. So, very similar to what we see in a lot of stories across time. Think about Harry Potter even, and that, looking for that elixir of life that will mean we never, ever, ever die. So the emperor was certainly looking for that assurance that he would continue. Now, I also asked you to look for the examples of listing. And here we've got the listing that occurs between, and I need to number some of these as I go down. We've got the listing that occurs between lines 7 to 12, basically. So if we look at 7 to 12, this is where we've got two lots of listing. We've got the clay warriors, the horses, a legion of foot soldiers, cavalry, archers, generals, so all of those living things, and then all of the weaponry, swords, lances, spears, battle axes in bronze, his artist made for him. And so this listing, it gives a rhythm to the poem. When we have got that combined with, because it crosses into the alliteration that I was just talking about, it gives it that beat. If you listen to it, clay warriors and horses, a legion of foot soldiers, cavalry, archers and generals, swords, lances and spears, and battle axes in bronze. And, you could also identify there the alliterative B, if you like, to give that last line that beat. And it also highlights how Udjuru felt when she stood there looking at all of these amazing artifacts. It would be overwhelming, I imagine, to actually be there and see the extent of what was achieved so long ago. And Udjuru says that she was in awe of what she was witnessing. So we've got that highlighted there. So we do have that real presence of the actual poet, but it also, at the same time, is showing us the desperation of the emperor, and that his fears and desire, or his fear of what might happen in the afterlife. I'm going to have to hang up that phone. It's Mrs. McDavitt. Who remembers Mrs. McDavitt? I'll have to call her back. The fear of the afterlife is highlighted here in his desperation for everyone to see how important he was, like his status. So in getting so many people to make these numerous and amazing things, and to have them all so many years spent doing this, it's all a big display of his status, isn't it? Look at how amazing I am. Look at what everybody is doing just for me and for my afterlife. So we've got the awe of Udjuru. We've got the heightened fear of the heightened fear of the emperor, but also that showcasing of his status. And it also serves to showcase the status, or showcase China's warring history and conflict. So China had a very brutal and violent past, and there is a linking in this point with later on in the poem when we're looking at the way that Ujuru was thinking about the differences between the past for Australia and the past for China. And prior to white man's colonisation, the Aboriginal culture was quite different to what we now know of the Chinese culture. And that brutality and that violence didn't occur for the Aboriginal people until white man came and invaded. So before I get too much more into all of that, we will just write this summary of what I was just saying. So the listing highlights the awe of Ujuru, when she visited the site. Also suggests the desperation of the emperor, and I mean, you know, his fears in that as well. And we're just going to add showcases his status and need to I guess it's a need to enforce his importance. And I guess the funny thing is, and I guess this is, you know, you could call it irony, and I'll talk about irony in a moment, but the irony being that, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not irony, I'd be interested to see what Ms. A. Church thinks, but the fact that it worked in a sense, because, you know, regardless of whether there was an afterlife for him that this clay army followed him into, if that didn't occur, here we are, thousands of years later, in Australia, reading a poem written about this emperor, and he is well known and he is famous, and he did leave behind that enormous, you know, symbolic gesture of his status in this amazing tomb. So it worked for him, didn't it? Okay, now, where are we up to? Oh, I also wanted just to make mention of the fact that it shows China's warring history and violent conflict or conflicts. Now, looking down a little bit, I want us to look at this last part of the poem now. Okay. Now, we've got irony is one of the other things that I asked you to look for. Now, irony can be a tricky thing to find, and if you had some ideas about irony, it would be interesting to see if you had the same ideas that I've got here. So, firstly, this idea here, okay, by chance, a pick and a shovel. Now, up here, we've got all of this detail about the plotting, the years, the artists, the enormous effort that it took to create this this legion of foot soldiers and cavalry and all of this for the emperor. And it lays, it lies secret for 2,000 years. And then, just by chance, it's found by a pick and a shovel. Something that's so simple as a pick and a shovel discovers this. And so that is irony in that, in all of the time that it took to create, and for all of that time that the Earth Mother guarded this secret, it was accidentally uncovered. So we're going to write irony, or you could put ironic tone. I mean, if you're not quite sure about what irony means, it can be a bit tricky to define. But if you think those times where people go, fancy that, like that's weird, that can sometimes be irony. So here it's just like, man, all of that for this, there's your irony. All that time and effort to construct and 2,000 years being hidden to be accidentally uncovered. There's a real sense of this as a humble uncovering. Pick and a shovel. Very humble compared to this, which is the opposite of humble. All right. Now, a couple of, I'm just wondering when to do this. Okay, we'll do it now. So I'm going to add a little bit here, down the bottom here, to this idea of the irony. Because this here, where it says his fear and his insecurity, all of the first part is about how strong he was, how brutal he was, how important he was, and what he was able to do. This bit here about the Earth guarding his secret for 2,000 years, that also suggests his importance, that the Earth Mother guarded his secret for 2,000 years. So he's important. She's protecting him. And all for this ending where he's revealed to be a scared man, a man scared of death. And so the irony here is that history portrays him as strong and invincible and powerful. His politics were repressive and oppressive, but ultimately he was vulnerable, and he was vulnerable and a victim of his own pride and insecurity. And we get the sense that he spent so much of his time trying to prepare for an afterlife that he didn't live in the life. I mean, he did live, obviously, and he did lots of things, but in all of that time spent preparing for the afterlife, all of that effort, imagine what he missed out on because of that preoccupation. So one of the main things that you wrote down on Tuesday that I asked you to look for was the idea of sacrificing our lives to the endless search for immortality. And so we here have that at the end in this ironic way. And it also is where we end up with this idea that we put up the top of we're all flawed, we're all vulnerable. And it doesn't matter how much we do to hide our truths, we are who we are. So this is where, and you know this already, but with a poem, with any text, whilst you're picking it apart and looking at these individual lines and these individual words, you're also looking at the overall ideas and themes and what it's saying holistically. So we are here going to write irony, and we will put history portrays him as strong and invincible. And just a little bit of extra info here. His politics were repressive. And yet he was ultimately vulnerable. Vulnerable to his pride and insecurity. So it's rather sad, this ending. Now, we're just going to add a couple of these bigger ideas here. So, 2 to be precise. We've got, with this image of the Earth Mother, woman as Earth, and I said before that this links with the Aboriginal culture. Remember that? We have an I guess it's an illusion. It makes us think about, or certainly Ujuru, it made her think about Chinese culture and beliefs in this poem as opposed to or as compared to Aboriginal culture. And I said a moment ago that we've got this warring history of China, and it's quite different to the way that Aboriginal culture prior to colonisation existed. Of course, there were fights and wars and things like that. That kind of is part of humanity, but certainly they didn't have this same sense of this one person who was important over all others. I mean, every tribe would have had those elders who were powerful, but in terms of the entire country being ruled by one important person like the emperor in China, that was very different. And so she's here when she talks about the Earth Mother nurturing her son. In the afterlife, the Aboriginal people believed that the earth was the space for ancestors to exist after life. And so that when an Aboriginal person, an important Aboriginal person died, their spirit being attached to the country was of most importance. And that's in contrast to what she's seeing here for this emperor. We've got this allusion to also that the importance of the earth for all cultures, but here in Aboriginal culture, is it's imposed upon by white man's destruction, especially white man's destruction of sacred Aboriginal land and the taking over of land. I'm just going to open up my door for my dog who wants to go out and get sporty. Emmett! Emmett! You doing dinner, Joe? You doing dinner? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I just had to make sure Emmett was doing dinner. Now, so this, this bigger theme, this bigger idea of the earth and its importance. So in China, the Earth Mother's, nursing her son, there's that importance of the earth. there's also this understanding that these clay warriors and horses, the foot soldiers, they were never intended to be a tourist attraction. There's something very sad about them ending up that way. I mean, it's awe-inspiring and it's amazing, and I guess it does allow the emperor to famously live on. But at the same time, there's a sadness that it's ended up as this almost tacky, money-earning tourist attraction. And similar things have happened in Australia, and Aboriginal people have fought very hard to regain cultural rights to places of significance. So, I mean, I've kind of just said a lot there, but what I want you to write from that and to think about is that the earth, and we're linking, of course, with what we were saying about China Woman's links, the earth is the space for ancestors to exist after life. And we're going to write this alludes to is probably the best term. Concerns, alludes to, it's a funny way to write concerns, alludes to concerns. Do I need to fix that, or are we good? Let's have a look. Oh, just fix it. Up. Oh, what am I doing? Alludes to concerns of white man's destruction of sacred Aboriginal sites. So when you are writing an essay and you're writing a response and you're using more than one poem to answer a question, you might be talking about a bigger theme that Ujuru explores. And if it is the concerns of white man and what has happened to important places and, what's happened in the destruction of Aboriginal culture since white man came, this is the kind of thing that you can talk about in a thematic way, so that, you could definitely talk about the idea of the destruction of sacred sites as, alluded to in Entombed Warriors, with the Earth Mother nursing her son for so long, and then the irony of an accidental discovery, and the tragedy, I guess, of this now just being a tourist attraction. And look, as I said, this is the sort of stuff that you can think about and write down in greater detail in notes or in the tables that you do. There was one more thing that I asked you to look for, and that was, I said I wanted you to consider what the tomb might be representative of. And hopefully you had some ideas about that. But what I saw it as is that the tomb represents the entrapment of the emperor, who lived looking for fame and glory in an afterlife rather than seeing death as a natural feature of life, thus preventing him from being able to feel peace during his life. So even though I said a moment ago, obviously he still lived and he still did these amazing things, he was still trapped by his fears, so that I imagine, or, we certainly get the sense in this image of him that there wasn't any true peace for him. He wasn't at peace with the future or with what might happen to him after death. So a tomb definitely can present entrapment, because if you're in a tomb, there's the suggestion that you can't get out, that it's dark, that you're surrounded. So that is what I was referring to when I asked you to look at what the tomb might represent, but I would be very interested to hear if you had different ideas about that. So this is what we were writing. The tomb represents the entrapment of the emperor. Who lived looking for fame and glory, in an afterlife, rather than seeing death as a natural feature, of life, thus preventing from being able to feel peace during his life. And Emmett has just come in as I am finishing this. Hold on, during his... Come here, Emmett. You can be a guest speaker, because someone suggested, I don't know if it was Whitney or Hannah, suggested that I should do something interesting at the end of these so that I make them a little bit more interesting. So Emmett, say something interesting.
Is Lucinda home for dinner?
Is Lucinda home for dinner? She will be home about 8 o'clock, but save dinner for her. What are we having for dinner? That will be an interesting thing.
Pies. I can't bother to do anything else.
Pies sound pretty good to me. Everybody loves a good pie. Are you going to do vegetables with the pies? Oh, dogs. Hey.
Am I going to do vegetables?
Yes.
Fine.
Please do vegetables. Vegetables and pies. That's a good Australian dinner. Excellent.
Right.
Say hello, Year 12.
Hello, Year 12.
Excellent. Thank you, Emmett. A little guest appearance there. I hope that has made your experience here today that much more interesting.
What class is this for?
Year 12 standard. Hey, English. Year 12.
Oh.
Yeah. Emmett's in Year 12 as well.
Because
he's at school with Hugo Hay.
It looks very boring.
It's not boring at all. It's very interesting. Thank you very much, Emmett. Go away now if you think that my life is boring.
It is.
It is not. Okay, Year 12.
You're an English teacher.
And that is amazing, not boring. How rude. All right, guys. Bye.